All right, so let's get started. Welcome everybody with the Frontend Lighting Talks today. This is a very special session because we have our friendly design colleagues as well in this room. This is also the last one of the year, and because we are with more people, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, of course, design related or front-end related. And I'm here together hosting with Febe.
Hello, my name is Febe. I'm a designer. And I work for Society for 3 years now, almost 3 years. And currently, I'm doing an assignment for Rabobank. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm the co-host tonight.
Thank you. Well, I'm Katjan, familiar face, the regular co-host / host of the Frontend Lighting Talks. Already working for Society for 3 years as a front-end developer. So it's all about front-end and technology for me. Different clients, so ING and Aegon are my current clients. Well, without further ado, we also have Egor in there. He will be talking about the gap. Egor, if you can wave or say hi, please, would be awesome. Yes.
Hi, everybody.
Nice, Egor. Great. Oh, yeah. This session is facilitated by Society. We are the front-end and design community. We do different kinds of stuff with Society. It's a very big company with all top 200 clients. But this is purely for educational and fun, this session. I really like the front-end community. Maybe Febe, you want to talk a bit about the design community?
Oh, we have at Society like 25, 30 designers. And what else can I say about that?
The SFA meetups, maybe?
Oh, yeah, we also have meetups for designers internally. And we also do courses together about UX topics.
Great stuff. So if you want to know more about us, feel free to get in touch via LinkedIn or just on the regular Society website. That's without the advertisement.
Yes, because today we have a nice planning for you. We're now doing the welcome for you. As you can see, we're doing the welcome. But after this, we have the talk about the gap between UX and front end. Then we have a small break, and after that we have a debate together with, on the one side, the designers, and on the other side, the front enders. And we are kind of the bridge between those two. That's why we are in the middle. So it will be very interesting. And after that, we have what do we have?
Yeah, questions, of course.
Questions, yeah.
You also can join the talk show if you want, because we're on Microsoft Teams, so you can unmute yourself if we ask you for, of course, and then you can join the discussions as well if you have cool stories to tell.
Yeah, and also if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, so we can ask the questions to Egor, who's online, or to one of our people here on the table.
Yes. Well, without further ado, I think Egor can start. So give them a big applause, I would say, right?
Digital applause.
Digital applause. Go ahead, Egor.
Okay, let me start my share my slides. So can we see the slides?
Yes, it's loading for me, but I think it's coming up.
So I've actually worked at Society in the past as well. So this is like 1.5 years ago. I used to work at Society. And I thought it would be a good chance to explain some of the work I've been doing currently and in the past. So let me show to the next slide. I'm what we call a design engineer. And I've worked for AMB as a lead. I've worked at Society for ING and Aeon and a few other companies, mainly in a kind of a role where I can see where design has been implemented. And my current role at Informat, I also specifically focus on design systems, also as a design system architect, and also for the current NL design system, which is a government-based initiative to help government departments and municipalities to implement a design system in a more generic sense, so we can open source the work and share that. And so so a lot of the work I do now is really kind of very, very similar to what we see in between front-end and design. And this is what I call the gap. I wrote an article about this about a year ago, and this topic keeps coming up. It really centers around the fact that we have a group of designers, and we discuss how product or feature or service is going to be built. And here I'm going to show you kind of this, it's a fake graph, but it shows in a conversational way how this gap manifests itself between the discipline between design and front end. So when we look at the kind of the knowledge we have for product concept, we have different types of designers, and these are just two of them. There's actually quite a wide range of design disciplines these days. And they often overlap, but once we get into the area going from the what going to the how, it becomes a completely different knowledge curve. And this is where we see different types of engineers who need to implement a design and how to primarily implement a concept and how the feature will become to fruition. We need to start having a discussion on how this works. So what if a designer asks for, well, I want a blue button, and then the developer asks, well, what blue button? Which color blue? Where do you want it? Why do you want it? So you get a lot of these discussions trying to figure out what this actually needs to be built. And from one silo to the other, it seems very obvious. So designers think, well, we only have one color blue for one type of action, but developers have in their toolbox a lot more colors, and they don't really define them in the same way as designers do. So there's always this kind of mismatch. And we see this mismatch almost kind of siloed now. We're seeing companies deploy kind of DevOps processes and design ops. And so these differences actually accentuate this gap. And so we have these disciplines end up being siloed between design and engineering. And what we see is that, well, somebody still needs to do the work in implementing the design and understanding what needs to be built. They understand what they mean by a certain color for a button or how the topography is supposed to work. And they need to also understand, well, what's spacing between the lines of the text? What is the positioning of the images? What kind of image proportions do we have? And these kind of decisions can then be engineered in the correct way. This helps both the designers and the engineers fill in this gap between the design and engineer. And this is what I call myself. I call myself a design engineer. Some companies call it a UX engineer, and some even call it UX technologist. They all come down to not creating design and not necessarily creating applications for that design, but implementing the design in a way that it can be consumed in an application or a CMS or other kind of systems. And so this is why a lot of my work is tailored around design systems, because design systems are systems of systems. And I need to understand both domains between design and engineering and communicate what the impact is of the design for the engineers, but also communicate the impact of the tech stack that can impact how the design comes to life. And so there needs to be this continuous interaction. So this is one of the things that we see a lot of. Either a developer is assigned to do that job, or a designer starts doing a bit of coding on the side, or it's actually, like in my case, who has been a designer for years, but also been a developer for years in a very specific role, and now focus purely on coding a design implementation, and mainly in the front end in my case. But that could also be for native apps, where we see design being implemented in native apps. There we also see this emergence of how code and design kind of come together. For a project I did for a company called Medic, we had to work out how this flow actually worked, and what were the tools that we needed to make the current processes an agile way of working, how they could interact with each other. So we had the main customer, but we also had the UX and front-end engineer actually situated in one single team. And so they could interact quickly with tools like Figma, and they could create tokens for these design decisions. And that's what a token is. It's basically the smallest design decision you can make. And then you can implement components in that system based on these tokens. And then you can deploy them into a storybook or in Zero Height. And so storybook becomes a demo of the implementation, which can be referred back to the customer. And Zero Height is then the specification of the design, how it should be implemented. And so when you link these two together, you get kind of this understanding of how the system actually clicks together, as it were. And so when we talk about tokens, that is actually the common language between the designers and developers. And when we look at Figma, we can see, well, we need to have kind of create components inside Figma. And with that, we can also say, well, we need tokens. We need specific names to define these decisions of, in this case, in this screen, I'm showing colors. And you can make them quite specific. And then these kind of small colors can be defined as a brand. And then these common tokens, which are then like layout specifications, or a spacing between within a page, or font size. And these can be populated by the brand tokens themselves. And then once you have the brand and common tokens properly populated, you can then start building components, which then in turn have their own specifications and own special values, because a list item doesn't have the same type of tokens that a button needs, and a button is interactive and has focus states. And so we allow components to have their own sets, so they become more manageable and also more shared. And so one of the things is that design systems need to be shared across different types of components, and even between different types of branding. So with the NL design system, we have multiple brands. So basically a white label system. And then the designers can actually talk in terms of these tokens. And when we're looking at these tokens, then we need to find, well, what is the scale? How do we define it? Do we use extra large? Do we use name 1, name 2? Or do we use kind of this more classifications like primary, secondary, or tertiary? And so these kind of setups are also kind of predetermined in when you build a system that both designers and developers need to work with. These are usually called foundations, and these foundations are then discussed and shared. And so it's very important when we have both these systems, the design teams and the engineering teams, decide on what these instruction sets are, what these tokens are, and they need to be negotiated and agreed upon. And once that happens, we then can start building structures that both design teams and engineering teams can actually utilize. But this is something that we see in this gap between development and design, and how we can then facilitate both disciplines and often project teams. And when we do this, we see this kind of drive towards deliverables. And so for creation, we often see things like Figma and Zero Height, where the design is created and where the design is specified. And we also see documentation on where we can get certain information, where assets are available. So you can download fonts, and you can also understand what kind of guidelines are used for accessibility. And also often the branding is separate. Branding is often a separate exercise from a design system. and the design system plugs into that documentation and makes use of that. And then we had start using the how do we publish all this? So this is where the engineers to have a big part in versioning, making sure that components are available through registries and NPM, and then how they're actually released and deployed into various web environments. And then that goes back in the feedback loop to creation. So once you've released it, then you can reiterate over these implementations. And that gets back to this kind of back and forth, or actually circular discussions, and how certain setups are used. Does it still work? And how can we benefit from these kind of setups where we have multiple iterations and design and engineering. But one of the things that we see, let me go back a few slides, in this setup, this is a lot of manual handover that was done initially because the designers and the developers were not sure how this was going to look. So we decided, well, let's do it step by step, do it manually, and discuss every step. How do we want this to work? And then we can start automating it. And so a lot of these processes are very common. And so now we see tools like Figma tokens, which can actually automate some of these kind of the flow from Figma to kind of the components by automating the token generation and actually versioning that, so we can roll it back, we can extend it, we can branch it off for different, not just for web components, but for other types of frameworks where we can actually have different sets and also branch it off and version it in that particular way. And even for native applications. And so a lot to see in this flow becomes more automated. And these automated flows start generating these token sets, and we end up with kind of the design engineering roles being kind of this gap, both being helping the teams create the design implementations. And now we're starting to see tools specifically to help engineers in this kind of role between design and engineering. And Specify is kind of an app that helps automate the generation of tokens, the common language between the two disciplines. And Supernova, where we also see kind of the, along with Knapsack, we see this kind of development process specifically for creating designs and managing designs inside it. And Backlight is another extended approach where they have everything in the web. So all the designs are in this system, but also the components are generated there. And so there's no need for something like Storybook. These systems can actually generate complete control and documentation of all the design decisions that are made, and also output configurable configurations for in JSON for teams to consume inside their systems. So this is kind of in a nutshell, my view of this gap. It's really kind of fun to work in. I've basically been doing this work in different titles for the last 25 years. And currently it's now formed in design systems where we see these kind of new tools come to light and help us build and also build applications, and also build understanding between what it is, what the design decisions are, and how we should engineer them into these applications or content sites. And so that's my talk. I hope that clarifies some of the things about the gap between design and engineering, and if there's any kind of infighting between designers and engineers, I'm always willing to help help the teams move forward, because that's also part of the work.
Thank you. Egor, for your talk. I've seen one question coming up in the chat, which is from Joris, and his question is: any suggestions on how to get this role into a company? I've seen business analysts trying to fill in this role, but they were not really suited for it, but made it hard to improve.
Yeah, so we're seeing, especially in larger companies, the role UX engineer actually being specifically created and so part of it is analysis, but part of it is also just communication, understanding what the design needs to be built, and helping, because what we see, especially with applications and larger systems, just engineering one of these applications requires already so many different disciplines. Adding design to it is just, for a lot of people, a bridge too far. And the same is true for design. There's no way we can have designers understand the intricacies and the complexities of a stack and guiding how these will implement it. So now we're seeing the roles that people used to do for implementing a design is now being filled in by someone like myself, where the engineering is done specifically. And so where do we find these people? These people are probably already working for you, because I worked for Society for years and I never had that title, but that was the work I was doing. And so one thing you can do is start identifying people who are kind of leaning toward this type of work and help them facilitate that work in a more clear and defined way. This is also something that companies are looking for. They're starting to realize that this gap exists, and they didn't realize it before because other people kind of filled in the task that needed to be done. But the tasks are now getting too complicated, and so now we need more specialized people to kind of help that along. And so I see another question: where does full stack engineer fit in with this? In my role as a design engineer, I often work full-time next to a full stack engineer and a designer. And I go back and forth and help them, or we all sit in the room together and work out what the issues are. And so some full stack engineers can actually do some of this design engineering work, but it depends on what their core background is. Some full stack engineers actually have more of a Java application-driven and integration-driven background for middleware and stuff. But some engineers actually have more of a framework like React kind of background, and then gets a little more easier to help with design decisions. But yeah, we're starting to see that this is a specific field as well.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else here in the room maybe have a question?
Sure, I have a question. Egor, basically people are working very closely together when making these features, I guess. Do you ever see this also relieves some of the friction you usually have between front-end and design?
Yeah, so my experience is that friction basically goes away so especially when you're talking about, so a lot of the friction comes from misunderstanding of what we're talking about. And the nice thing with tokens is that you focus on the very specific questions, and then you just need to, well, how are we going to categorize this? What is this naming convention we're going to use? And then you can actually discuss what these design decisions are. And then once you have that, then these iterations go very fast. So there's a bit of a ramp up until you have the foundation in place. Once you have that foundation in place, foundations, there are things like your colors, your spacing, your scaling system, but also what kind of animations you kind of want to use. And once you have that in place, and you can start building, and you have your own stack, because these systems, the design system often has its own kind of own build pipeline to help build specific components and publish them in a specific way. Once you have that up and running, then you kind of have a very quick one-on-one. You can make changes quickly. I had an instance where I had to change a naming convention because we were starting to use different types of backgrounds and we wanted to name them more functionally instead of the type of color it was. That happened like within an hour. We had the whole system reconfigured.
Awesome. All right. I think it's pretty nice that it can relieve some frustration as well, especially when you mentioned the scenario of, well, the button is blue and what is blue then? I've been there, I've done that, so nice to see some solution for that as well. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, sure, I have a question. If you were interested to roll into a role like this, what would your recommendations be?
Well, so for me, this role is really focused on the engineering side. So it is good to have some kind of design background or design knowledge, but a lot of front-enders don't really start there. They start more on the development side. And so if you want to start moving more into this direction, it's good to kind of sit in with the designers like once a week, follow their conversations and try to see where your gap is in where you need additional knowledge. Is it typography? Do you understand how color mixing works? Because this is also a feature in CSS now, where we can do quite complex color mixing with actually color spaces. And so these are also kind of design focused areas, which also have kind of a physics and development background. So it's kind of this shift and trying to search where your development skills will need to be extended with design knowledge.
All right, cool, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't think there were any more questions, also not in the chat. So, Igor, thank you very much for your talk. And give him a applause, a digital applause, or your physical applause. Yeah, and I think it's time for a break now.
Yeah,
if I'm correct.
I think so as well. Small break, 5 minutes. We'll be back for the talk show, of course. And if you have any questions for the people here or any spicy discussions you want to have, you can mention them right away and we can implement them if that's possible. See you in 5 minutes. Thank you all.
Okay, we're back. We're back.
We're back.
Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed your short break because it was very short. Well, now we're going to start the spicy talks. Well, that came out a little bit wrong, but I didn't mean that. But you know what I mean. So yes, we have here on the table 4 guests. One of them is having a little toilet break, but that's okay. But here we have the designers on this side, and the other side we have the front-end developers. But let's start with this side, with the designers. My side, just kidding. On the corner here we have Arno.
Yes, hi, my name is Arno Hartsveld. I'm working for about 5 years for Sogeti right now. Currently stated at ASML. Working for a few nice assignments at Hasselby, the city of Eindhoven, but also Village, and looking forward to the debate.
Bring it on. Okay, and next to you we have Robert.
Hi everyone, my name is Robert. I've been with Sogeti for almost 6 years. Worked for various nice clients. Think of KLM, ABN, T-Mobile, and now I'm stationed at Nationale Nederlanden, where I'm diving into the world of claim damage insurances, which is cool. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, we skip you. Then we go to the other side, and there we have John.
Hi, I'm John Rojas, working 1.5 years for Sogeti already, and now my client, where I'm stated now, is ABN AMRO as a front-end engineer. And yeah, I'll be excited to hear what the front-enders are debating with us today.
And last but not least, we have Edward. Edward, introduce yourself.
I'm Edward, and I've been working at Sogeti for 3 years now as a front-end developer. Currently, I'm stated at the CIBG, which is part of the government, Ministry of Health and Sports. And I've worked with various other government clients as well, such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Dutch Police.
Okay, well, now we've introduced everyone. Well, we go to our first question. And that one is a spicy one already. No, it's not spicy. We just start very slow. So a question to the first question: how should developers and designers work together? So I'm very curious. Arno, can you start? How do you think?
Yeah, well, they should work very good together, of course. I think in close collaboration. Personally, I'd like to have engineers also in the front of the project, the concept phase. To test, to validate whether prototypes are possible to build, or to share insights from developers, maybe they have better solutions than I can come up with as a designer. So personally, I love having engineers in the front, but I love myself in the back of the process also, to make sure all designs are implemented well, tested for multiple users, display sizes, etc. Yeah.
Here and on this side, how do you think, John? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I think for sure the front end has to be also in the development phase, let's say testing and also card keeping for what the front end has to be, and make sure that we deliver in that phase, we deliver good quality front end designs inside our development also. So yeah, I think it's very, very important.
Yeah, well, to add on to that, I think that while developing, it's very important that developers also approach the designers to check that what they're doing is still in line with the design. It's very easy to wave off the path, I think. And it's also, besides that, it's also good if the designer every now and then does a smoke test to make sure that nothing's been missed in some of the other things that have maybe already been done for a while.
Robert, do you have anything to
No,
add?
definitely, I agree on both statements. I think it's nice to have a close relationship with the front-end developers who are working on developing designs that have been thought up. And yeah, the more cooperation between the two, I think, is better, because like Egor mentioned, also there's always this small gap. I think it's very important to have that filled. And like Arno said, having development at the start of the process, just to see what is possible and what not. And yeah, and of course, in the end, validating and testing if everything's been implemented correctly. So, yeah.
In my experience, also good to in the early stages of a project to take the engineers and the developers along with the insights we gained from the users. To really build empathy with these users, so they fully understand the background behind the design choices, so they're more able to improvise within scope when they have to make small design decisions. Yeah. Because engineers are also designers, because they are actually building.
Now, as you see, Egor also mentioned, well, you can speak up, Egor, if you want, about your comment, because that's an interesting comment as well, about being proactive as a designer and a front-ender to look for communication.
So my experience in this is that when there's a design decision made, let's say in the front end, which front-enders often need to do, if that's not discussed with design, then either it never gets fixed, or it takes a lot of effort to refactor it in a way that it gets working properly. And so if there's going to be a change, you often need to know that a certain design feature is being built before it actually gets designed. And so the way to work together is to work on features early, sit in with refinement sessions, things like that. So it's very clear on what can be built and what's not going to be built.
Nice comment. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one.
Yes, let's go to the next question.
Well, should the designer leave any space for interpretation of the design for the front ender? And I'm especially interested from the front end side right now. So, Edward, if you gave me your opinion, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think it depends, because if you have a design system, I think it can be risky to let the front ender do his own thing a lot, because then you can get issues where if you want to change the design system later, that all the different applications might have bugs appear in them simply because all the front-end developers went their own way and they think it weren't quite according to the specs. But in a small project where it's much more loosely defined and you don't have a design system and you just sort of have a visual representation of how it's supposed to look like, then it can make the whole process a lot more efficient if the front-end developer can also make decisions on their own.
So for small projects, front-end can have more saying, and for large enterprise applications, it's a bit more divided, the work. Is that what you're saying right now?
Maybe it's not necessarily quite that distinction, but in the large picture, maybe, yeah.
Interesting. How does it feel from the design part of you when a front-ender touches your design? Maybe, Robert, you want to mention something about it?
Yeah, it's interesting statement, because I think it's very important for the designer to keep a close watch on the implementation and the build of the designs, and to make sure that everything's being implemented in the correct way. Leaving certain space or not being there at the point when decisions are made causes the front-enders to make own decisions, and these can, of course, impact the design or the application. So I think it's just very important to keep that space as small as possible.
Any other comments?
Yes, I've definitely experience with that. We have rolled out, let's say, from the front-end teams, because sometimes we say, okay, we try to be as close as possible with the design, but sometimes we forget the team, the designer team, and then sometimes we roll out things, and then later we see, okay, this is on production ready, but it's not according to the design, or just it's not nice, or designer. It brings frustration for the designers, and then what we experience is that we have to do more, let's say, on a later date, and maybe 1 month later,
or
rework a month later, and then that can bring frustration. So keep the design in the phase before rolling out that the designer also do some testing before we roll something else, because we only test for the backenders or the business, and we sometimes forget about the designers. And sometimes the designers aren't there also because the designers are maybe doing other stuff.
Yeah, busy or
busy.
Yeah.
So, but make sure that we keep the designers close to us and before we roll out products.
Yeah. So basically, also the technical feasibility early in the project, so early communication.
Yes,
it's interesting.
And
for
testing,
both
and for testing also, let them do the testing also, not only the business part, and also giving them the testing URL so they can check the design.
Very important. Yeah.
Egor, do you also want to say something about it?
Always. So a lot of this space is, so what is this space for interpretation, right? It's for me, it's often this space is where it's not filled in by the designer because it has technical ramifications, or it's very kind of specific to an implementation. So let's say there's now this new way you can interact with focus elements, and this is an additional specification that's available in CSS. This may not be known to designers, or not even known to a lot of the developers. And so there's room to say, well, let's try it this way. And then you can do like a spike or a puck, and then show it. And then, so this is this leeway where both designers and developers can dive into a topic and then come up with a solution and then present it to each other and then have the discussion. And usually then if it's understood properly, then it's usually not a problem. But it's not like, oh, I've made a decision and then not to talk about it again, right? And then a month later find out that the decision was made, which may or may not have been correct.
It should be a bit of an open discussion, and when as Peter says, basically Peter in the chat also gives in, if the design is already made, then it leaves little space for any extra interpretation because you already made some agreements with the design and the front point. Yeah. So,
but you should always ask questions.
Yes.
So if the design is made and you don't understand, ask questions, and that can bring new situation to light, a new understanding. Because if you don't ask questions, then everybody assumes that it's correct, and it's almost never correct. Especially the first iterations really need to be kind of understood by everybody.
Yes, good closer. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Okay, this is a spicy question for you guys, for the front enders. Name one aspect you want to change about the designer. Yeah, John, you can go first.
Oh, I want to...
Okay, well, Edward goes first.
Sure. I want to preface this by saying that so far the designers I've worked with, I've enjoyed the collaboration a lot. I think they do their job really well. If I could change one thing, I would like the designers I work with to know a decent amount of HTML and CSS. So far, I've worked with a couple of designers who are very experienced with HTML and CSS. Actually, that just feels right because it's very much on the visual side and the experience side of the tech, pretty much, and it allows you to them to understand the problems you're facing on the UI side.
Yeah, I agree. It's very important. It's healthy for a designer to know about certain possibilities layout-wise for a healthy portion of knowledge on HTML, CSS. I agree. Yeah. Can definitely benefit the design process and the collaboration with Frontend. Yeah, right. You can come up with the most fancy designs possible, but if it's technically less feasible or developed.
John, what would you change?
I agree with him. Also, to add upon his comment, let's say the language will between the front-end designer will be changed a lot of easier. You can talk with ease because sometimes I have designers that use business languages or more sometimes for developers are difficult to understand, and we then prefer to use like markup languages or CSS or HTML. Okay, you want this to be bigger, maybe some pixels, add some pixel on it, and that can be easier for the developer to understand also. But we sometimes hear a lot of business languages, and sometimes we cannot translate that in our development. So it would be good to have knowledge of CSS and HTML or JavaScript to help us achieve the goal. Yes, watch it.
Yes. Thank you. I don't see any questions or remarks in the chat, so we'll continue with the next one, I guess.
Just switch it around.
Yeah. Let's switch it around, rules, of course. We just talked about what we want to change about designers. Well, being a frontender, I'm also interested in designers, what they want to change about us. So please, go ahead, Arno. I feel there's a whole list coming.
Please look at the designs, man.
Yes.
Look at them. No, that's quite often the application deviates from a design perspective from what you have delivered, explained the rationale behind it, and then it ends up being something completely different. But that is also the responsibility for the designer, of course, just to stay in close contact and have open debate about maybe there's a mistake in my design, and you have to interpret it and display it or present it. So I think close collaboration would solve this.
Yeah, and just being open and transparent. If you have questions or you have doubts about certain design choices made, step up and approach designer maybe without just staying behind your desktop or your laptop.
Yeah.
Development. I think that's very important. Yeah.
So really work together as a team because you're doing it together, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, having the developer approach the designer before sending the pull request, that can solve a lot of problems. I know it's for myself as a developer, it can be very hard to see all the details in the design and notice them all. I guess I don't look at it the same way as a designer would look at it. So I often catch myself also missing details, and then it's not quite the same. And
I experience that too, because sometimes I'm scared to give in the pull request to look at it. So sometimes you want to finish stories, and it's easier to collaborate with other developers. Then sometimes I say, okay, I will need to have this designer to work on it or to check for me. Sometimes I know I will get comments, so you want to deviate it from that, and then but it's true that we have to work more together.
Robert, do you have any other input for this aspect?
No, I see that Egor made a comment and somebody else.
Yes. Your comment? Egor, you can go ahead with your comment if you want to.
It's mainly that some of the things that annoy one, the developer or the designer, are often the same thing. So they have difficulty articulating what it is they want, and then then you end up with scope creep. Oh, well, okay, this can work as well, and then the project just gets bigger and bigger. And so that's something that both designers and developers are quite easy to fall into that trap, and they can actually help make that worse. So it's important to focus on what it is you want and try to explain that first.
Yeah,
that is hard.
Yeah, indeed, it's very hard. I also see one last interesting question from Peter. So what is delivered by the designer? I think it also depends per company. But yeah, please, Arno.
Yeah, for example, at ASML, we have a quite high defined design system we work with. So my deliverables are always just wireframes.
Yeah.
I refer to where they can find components. They are all documented well. So my deliverables are mostly prototypes, user flows, wireframes, etc. But in other companies, you need a perfect pixel design delivered, because it has to be judged by, say, the branding department, or to see if it's in line before it can be coded. So that refers really to the culture of the company and the existing processes, etc.
Yes, nice one. I think Peter also says it indeed pretty clear. Agreements about the deliverables avoids a lot of discussion and afterwards work that needs to be done. So that's nice. Let's go to the next discussion.
Yes, so one common dilemma that companies like startups find themselves in is the attempt to put one individual in charge of both user experience and front-end development. So the question is, do you think that these rules should always be separated, or is it okay to can it all be done by one person? I'm very curious, John. Oh, sorry. It's just the wrong timing, but.
Oh, okay. This is a difficult one because sometimes when you're in this like startups, the client doesn't know what he wants yet, so it's like playing with some layouts. You can quickly buy some layouts and add it to your project, and then when it gets bigger, then you hit into troubles. That with the design you have to be more creative, and then sometimes it's late, a later stage that you want a designer to come in, and mostly then you have to redesign the whole project. So that's I think that's one example.
Of course, it's like you said, it's familiar or common in startups to cut costs, and they mostly think like, okay, we have a front-end developer, he's also fit to do the design, which you sometimes, of course, see. But yeah, if you look at a bigger scale, I think it's very nice, and also with the UX design profession being so important in the IT landscape, to have a UX professional on board, just to have that second opinion, a better, closer look on how this design is implemented by front end. But of course, there may be also cases that a front ender is very much in control of the design, or he also has a good eye on how certain things should work, look, feel. So me as a designer, I'm not gonna cancel that immediately, but yeah, it's very dependent on the topic, like is it a startup or a bigger company, or how the team is built up. Yeah.
Question from Drazen. Define being in charge. I'm in charge of both at my current assignment. I do neither of these things, but make sure everyone is up to date on the state of the two, and that the two communicate with each other.
Yeah, I think that also refers a bit to the gap of Egor, of course.
Yeah.
Keeping it in charge, keeping it in line. It's also very interesting. So it's perfectly aligned.
I think it's also depending on what is this the core product of the startup, and in which stage are you going to develop it? Are you going to build a prototype for funding? I think a developer could build that. But should it persuade users to switch from the company to the startup you're working for? You need a UX designer.
I think it's easy to say that if it's internal application, you can use a developer for that. But whenever you touch the public eyes, it's easier to have it's better to have a designer.
I mean, I think even if you have a front-end developer who knows a lot about design, it can be risky, because the front-end work you do as a front-end developer is very different from the work you do as a designer. Like with front-end, you're really looking at the technical part of it. You're thinking about how do you structure the code properly.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the design, you're really thinking about the user and how it will look. It's very hard to keep your focus on both things to make sure that you have a high-quality design and high-quality code, that you're doing both at the same time.
So summary, you can do it in one person, but it depends on the task and on the project that you're.
Dependency of the product.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to the next question.
Yeah, so we're running also a bit out of time, but we are enjoying it at least. So we'll continue a bit more minutes, and then we will end it. So 10 more minutes, I think, something like that. Well, interesting one. We already talked about it, but what do you think about design-only teams? So teams are only designers are in a specific team, and development-only teams. So the designer and front-end are separated from each other. is this way of collaboration? Oh, hi, I see here. Is this way of collaboration with designer? Is that the way, or should there be a different way? Arno, I already saw you reacting.
Yeah.
So please feel free.
I think this is the way to ruin your product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you get separated silos, different cultures, competition on the work floor, all sorts of stuff you don't want to run into. So you really have to be careful that you stay together, meet up often to discuss the progress, the work, the designs, etc. Otherwise, this is the end.
It raises the bar for communication as well,
Yeah.
and that's so important with what we talked about today. Yeah.
Well, that's clear.
Could there also be benefits? John, what do you want to say?
No, it's trying to understand the. So you prefer to be on like two separate teams?
No, he's saying the opposite.
Oh, the opposite.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm trying.
I think it's good for you designers and developers, for example, in guilds, to come together to discuss stuff. How should we solve this issue, etc. But in the actual working together, I think you need to collaborate like this.
I think that's also slightly in the process when you're already building. I think if you really look at the UX spectrum, you want to do a deep dive in what a user needs or wants to expect from this application. And I can also see a case that you would pick a week and you maybe invite some stakeholders and the designers to come up maybe with a certain solution for designing a typical interface. And this could be maybe only a certain amount of time, so when you're only dealing with designers, maybe.
Yeah, so like a design sprint.
Something like that. Yeah. But when you're actually building, I think, like you also said, it's very important to have that communication and that collaboration between both disciplines.
Multifunctional teams.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Disciplinary teams.
I can imagine you have teams that have like specific goals, like maybe a team that focuses on a design system or whatever, but even a team that focuses on design, you should probably have some front-end developers in there, so that you have that collaboration between the tech side and the design side, and also a team that focuses on development. You want to have a designer who can make sure that it's still following the design of the corporate where you're working.
Yeah, I've been in back-end meetings. They are hard for design.
Yes.
Also for front-enders sometimes.
I think it's a bit like Egor has explained it, and in the graph that you have the UX, and then that's closer to the client, and then you have the designer that's moving forward to the developer. So it's also good to have like maybe two teams between the designers that will, let's say, one for the public and one for the client and one for the developer that will work developer, and then it can chain and communicate it in that way, chaining with each other.
Nice. I see also Peter in the chat as well, talking about we're not going back to waterfall. Yeah, of course we're not going back to waterfall. I think we can all agree that multiple communication and multidisciplinary teams is the way to go for us, and especially with developing a product for users and getting new insights constantly. You can continue as well. Thanks. Let's go on, I think.
Yeah. So the next question. How to make the shift in a career from front-end developer to UX UI designer and vice versa.
So let's keep it a bit short for time's sake. So maybe you guys have past experiences.
Not personally, but I think if you, as a UX UI designer, want to go more towards the front end, then well, obviously you need to learn to code, and I think also more like you need to like learn how to code in a kind of company environment. Now I can imagine you want to take this in small steps. So my recommendation would be start in a hobby project, learn a simple language like JavaScript, and try and make your first application like maybe a quick, easy game, and then you can maybe expand onto like learning Angular or another JavaScript framework, and then from there you can try working together with like the developers and see if you can keep up, and like that maybe you can slowly grow into a role of a front-end developer.
And then, do you know any platforms where you can learn that?
Yeah, Google.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, very broad.
For me, I think a designer can start building UI libraries, and that's a good starting point. So try to build like a new button in HTML, CSS, or other frameworks, and that's a good start. And design and develop your own buttons. So that's a good start to become a developer later
Yeah.
on.
If I have to counter that and look at front-end learning design, I think there's already been a big change, a big shift in tooling that we use as designer. I think you've all heard of the Figma tooling, which lets you kind of think in a bit more different way than we used to. Maybe when we just had a blank canvas and we had some requirements and some user research to just build it. Now with Figma, you're thinking more of placement, and there's easily functions to float stuff from left to right, or to have auto layout, of course, which instantly gives you a whole set of forms with which files. So I think that's a good shift also for you guys to maybe improve and make that shift. The creativity part, of course, that's up to you guys. That's something that's maybe a bit harder to learn, but yeah.
What would be maybe a starting project that you'd maybe recommend? What would I first make if I want to make this step?
I would say make an exact duplicate of an application you love, or a website you love. Then you understand about coloring, about fonts, about spacing, etc., that kind of stuff. So really the UI, the visual part, do that for a few projects in your spare time. And that you can go, for example, to UX design, as in user flows, wireframing, understanding where does the user enters the application, and how can we cater the user to succeed as fast as possible with the best outcome. And then maybe go to user research tab. That really depends where your preference is.
Yeah, I have one very fun question in the chat. Just wondering, and this one is from Peter. Just wondering if designers and developers are different kind of people on average. Well, that's a very good question. So, what do you think? Are two different roles like men and women?
Everyone is unique, right? So
I think there are actually quite a few similarities. I mean, especially when you're looking at society, like I think we're all interested in like IT exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think there are also some differences, but maybe I'd say more similarities than differences, personality-wise.
That's very nice to hear, Edward. Yeah, no, that's good. I also agree with that. Of course, there are differences, but we're all working in the same industry, the IT and society. And I think, more on the technical aspect. Of course, there's more to learn for design, and maybe more on the building creativity part of front-end. But there's a lot of stuff that we touch upon, both touch upon.
Right,
I agree.
Yeah, nice. Well, yeah.
That was the last question.
That was the last question indeed. I hope you guys at least liked this kind of form of talk show debate. I personally really loved it, just having an open discussion with our fellow designers and front-enders. We didn't drag each other over the table, so that's good.
We agreed a lot with each other.
Yeah, we agreed a lot. So let's make it happen at the assignment as well. Well, for the last few minutes, we have some announcements, of course, to make. We are going to look at. We had an amazing 2022. We have reached 1,000 members, which is awesome. We're already at 1,200, I think. So feel free to ask people to join the meetup as well, and to share the news and have fun with each other. This year we talked about WebAssembly, fluid architectures, did different deep dives, and also an experimentation of this talk show debate. Well, which is pretty awesome. For next year, we want your input again. So if you are like, well, this is really cool, we want it again, feel free to share it. But we will, of course, be coming back with the regular lightning talks with 3 different subjects, usually different speakers, internal, external. Feel free to join. And for next year, we will keep it short, actually. Yeah, we will start in February. Communication will be soon up for everybody. And feel free to contact us. Are there any questions left for Egor Arno.
Robert, John, or Edward? I don't see anything coming up in the chat. Now is your time to speak or be forever silent. Okay.
Yeah, maybe applause for everybody who was here in the talk show, and Egor as well. Thank you for your time. Have a great one. And this was the end of the Frontend Lighting Talks, I think, right? We will stop the recording. You can still chill and hang out here. We will enjoy a beer and some snacks. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Egor. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks, Egor. I will contact